Hi, I'm Kirk Geller with Gaming America. Today I'm here with Robert Jacobson, Executive Director of the California Council on Problem Gambling. How are you today, Robert?
I'm doing very well, and I'd like to thank you for the opportunity for the interview today.
Of course, thank you so much for joining us. And I was wondering if you could delve into how problem gambling has evolved into the online space for gaming.
Absolutely. So I think it's important to establish the preface that in California, gambling online is not currently legal. So as I run the California Council on Problem Gambling, our answers will be based on that perspective of how the legalization the legalization of gambling in other states has kind of overlapped into the California market. And one easy example I can give you for that is to say that 15 years ago, callers who indicated that their first preference for any form of gambling or location of gambling to our helpline represented less than 1%, whereas in 2024, they represented nearly 15% of callers. We've also seen increases in callers who are seeking help for online gambling. Also, although this is not something that you would generally associate with online gambling, we're seeing increases in callers seeking help for high-frequency cryptocurrency trading, high-frequency stock trading, so a lot of other activities that are also centered around bets or high-risk wagers, if you will, placed online.
Of course. And those increased calls, is that a positive sign that there's more resources available, or maybe a sign that problem gambling has been increasing in recent time?
Well, when we tell you how much problem gambling there is, we're typically citing something called a prevalence survey. And what we're saying is, what is the prevalence of a problem gambler existing, or what is the prevalence that somebody will experience a gambling problem at some point in their lifetime? Unfortunately, due to a lack of funding, we have not had a prevalence survey in California in nearly 20 years. So I cannot definitively say that gambling problems have increased, decreased. We don't know. We base it off of the most recent data that we have. What we can generally say is that we have seen that people who gamble online, there is a qualitative belief in the field that online gambling is likely to increase prevalence rate. This is actually substantiated by research out of European markets. But again, we don't have that research to substantiate it in our markets. The research we do have tells us that whether or not prevalence increases, the speed and frequency of losses, the speed and frequency of which somebody develops an addiction, and the harms that they experience through their addiction all occur more rapidly. So we know that whether or not more people are developing a problem as a result of online gambling, those who do develop a problem are being harmed more and harmed more quickly because of the increased access. In terms of the other part of your initial question is the calls to the helpline. Those, it's important to note that we don't have what we would say control. So people who call the helpline, in large part, are people who have come across the number to the helpline. In California, as in most markets, the helpline number is posted in most casinos and most places where you can gamble legally. And also, as in most markets, it is not posted in most places where you cannot gamble legally. So again, qualitatively, not quantitatively, we can infer that if we're seeing massive increases on people who are calling for help related to offshore betting, online gambling, online casinos or poker, or sports betting, all of which are not legal in California, and they're not being exposed to that helpline number through their preferred choice of gambling, it is likely that there is a much greater number of people in need that are not calling. And again, so this is qualitatively, we can infer that, yeah, it's indicative of more people seeking help.
Well, we certainly appreciate that detailed breakdown. What are some of the challenges you've been facing in California specifically with problem gambling and CALPG?
Well, honestly, the largest problem in California, it's an old story and it's an old hat. It's just funding. One of my favorite statistics, it's a complicated one, but I think it's a really important one. So there is a study, national survey of funding for problem gambling services. What this survey has done, and there's a more recent survey, it's conducted every 3 to 4 years. What this survey has concluded is that substance use disorder in the United States is about 3.8 times as prevalent as gambling disorder. So substance use disorder is drugs and alcohol. So for every one gambler, there are 3.8 people suffering from a drug or alcohol addiction. Nationally, funding for substance use disorder is just under $382 for every $1 funded for problem gambling services. Thus, with a little bit of division, as much as everyone hates math, you can see that substance use is funded at a rate of about 100 to 1 to gambling disorder. Now, there's a lot of reasons for this, which we don't have time to go into in this answer, but I will close the answer to this question by saying that California is fortunate in that we have the largest budget for problem gambling services of any state in the country. We're fortunate until you remember that we have 43 million people, and on a per capita basis, we are in the bottom 20% of funding nationwide. So our challenge is always that we work really hard to do more with less. We're very proud of the fact that we believe we do succeed at that. We offer a statewide treatment program available at no cost. We have more than 20 different help services, all available at no cost. We have prevention programs and marketing, and all of that is available to those in need at no cost. But at the end of the day, the programs lack the funding to be broader and larger than they need to be. The public education that is necessary for more people to seek help is, again, lacking the funding. And, we started this by saying that I'm citing data from a 20-year-old survey. So, again, it's an old hat. It's just money, but that is definitely our challenge.
Thank you for sharing. And I was wondering, I know you said online gaming is still unavailable in California, but how would CALPG go about helping a player who's online versus in a retail location?
Well, the good thing here is that our programs don't make a distinction between that. And so anybody who is in need of help would be able to call our helpline 1-800-GAMBLER or go directly to one of the providers under the CalGETS, California Gambling Education and Treatment Services program, and do what's called an intake. So it's a 2-hour session with a therapist where they evaluate whether or not you've got a gambling problem. We're not distinguishing between whether or not it's online, in-person, sports betting, any of that. We're just looking to see if you have a gambling problem. If you meet 1 out of 9 criteria, and those 9 criteria, they're set by the American Psychological Association, so they're the clinical side. But if you meet 1 of the 9, you would ordinarily not be diagnosed as someone having a problem. You would need 4 of the 9 to be diagnosed as having a problem, but you only need to meet 1 of the 9 to be admitted into the no-cost statewide program. So fortunately, we have the infrastructure there.
And something I've heard, especially at the IGA conference here, is that responsible gaming and problem gambling have gotten a bit confused in recent time. I was wondering if you could share how those two separate and the separate initiatives that each has to help players.
Absolutely. I would say it's important to start by understanding or by establishing, I should say, that the gaming industry utilizes the word gaming, and as such, we use responsible gaming and problem gambling. Now, problem gambling, it's not the clearest terminology, but it is the clearest terminology that we have. It is very hard to convey complex topics in very few words. And I've been in this field for almost 15 years. I have wanted to find something better for 15 years, and I have yet to find something better. So our job is really to educate the public what gambling disorder is the clinical term, what gambling disorder is. And gambling disorder is being addicted to gambling. There is a lower tier of that where you're being harmed by your gambling, but maybe have not developed the actual issues in brain chemistry that result in an uncontrollable urge to gamble. And so we take those 2 levels of disordered level 2 and disordered level 3, the clinical terms, and we call them problem gamblers. Anybody who's being harmed by gambling is experiencing a gambling problem. Now, responsible gaming, we use that terminology because it makes sense, because it is the gaming industry. And I have actually been for many years a big proponent of that term. However, if you look at the fastest growing entertainment segment in the country right now, it is in-app purchases on cell phones. So mobile gaming. And this is exclusionary of gambling, although it may include gambling-like games. So a slot machine on your phone, but that one that is not utilizing sweepstakes or any form of cash out whatsoever. It's literally just digital currency that you can play with no redemption value. Those still generate, tens and hundreds of millions of dollars a year. So the depending on the metric you use, the second or the third largest well, depending on the metric you use, the largest or second largest entertainment industry in the country right now is gambling. Cable television being the other of those two. It depends on if you include streaming services in there or not. So let's just assume all streaming services, cable, everything is number one, gambling is number two, mobile gaming is number three, and mobile gaming has a growth rate dramatically higher than that of either of the two in front of it, set, depending on the projection you read, to break a $100 billion a year industry sometime in around 2030 to 2032. So why am I talking about video games on a gambling thing, and why did I spend such a long time talking about it? It's because those are also gaming. And yet, under the law, those are not currently defined in most jurisdictions as gambling. Now, I would argue, and there's a longer answer, that prize, chance, and consideration are the three components of the legal definition of gambling, and in-app purchases in mobile games often meet that definition, but legislatures generally have not recognized them as gambling yet. So the term responsible gaming starts to become confusing, because are we talking about going to a casino and gambling responsibly? Are we talking about playing a video game responsibly? Are we talking about an online casino? And so that's where some of that confusion is beginning to come from. And so I would say problem gambling and responsible gambling probably make more sense when you talk specifically about a casino. And then from there, you need to create a separation. The other confusion point here, I think, is people think that if you gamble responsibly, you'll never develop a gambling problem. That's not true. If you gamble responsibly, you will greatly reduce the odds of developing a gambling problem. And arguably more importantly, you will position yourself to recognize when you're on the path to developing a problem sooner, be able to get help sooner, and should you seek help and are committed to getting that help, potentially be able to recover to a point where gambling or gaming can return to being part of your activities in the future. Whereas if you don't get that help and you start to develop those brain chemistry components that I'm not going to go into here, you may never be able to return to gambling.
Well, we certainly appreciate you creating a distinction between those two. And thank you again for joining us today. For Gaming America, I've been Kurt Geller.